The moment Damien Cross swaggered into courtroom 7 with a blood red stamp pad in one hand and a grin in the other, people stopped breathing. He had written "Offer Not Accepted" across the summons in giant slashing letters, as if a courtroom were a restaurant and justice was something he could send back to the kitchen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, pale and cold, catching the shine on his Italian loafers and the diamond flash at his cuff. He smirked at the bailiff, dropped into his chair like a man arriving for entertainment, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Let's get this over with. Your little corporate ritual has no authority over a free man." 3 rows behind him, Evelyn Harper lowered her eyes and clutched a thrift store handbag with both hands, so tightly her knuckles turned white. Nervous, she wore a neatly pressed gray cardigan over a faded blue dress, the kind of careful dignity that comes from making one outfit do the work of 10. She was 68 years old, a widow, a retired school cafeteria worker, and for the last 4 months she had been sleeping in her living room because every time she walked past the front hallway table and saw the foreclosure notices, her chest tightened so hard she thought her heart would stop. Damien had filed a fraudulent lien against her house after she refused to pay for one of his legal sovereignty packages, a scam he sold to desperate people by promising they could erase debts, taxes, and court orders with red ink and pseudo-law nonsense. Evelyn had said no, so he decided to make an example of her. And if you've ever wanted to see arrogance walk into a room thinking it can humiliate decency and walk back out untouched, stay with this one, because before this hearing was over, that red stamp would become the dumbest thing Damien Cross had ever lifted to paper, and you are going to want to tell me in the comments the exact second you knew he was finished. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Helena Ward entered the courtroom. She was not theatrical. She didn't need to be. She carried herself with the kind of calm that made other people sit up straighter without understanding why. Silver threaded through her dark hair, which was pinned back neatly at the nape of her neck. Her robe hung clean and severe from narrow shoulders. Her face was composed, almost gentle, until she looked at someone long enough for them to feel their own lies catching fire. Around the courthouse, people called her the listening judge because she let fools talk until the truth walked out of them under its own weight. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses once, and looked at the red scrawled filing in front of her. No expression, no reaction, just that terrifying stillness. "Mr. Cross," she said, voice low and level, "did you write this across a lawful court notice?" Damien leaned back, one ankle over his knee, and spread his hands as if explaining something obvious to children. "I corrected it. An offer was made. It was not accepted. Contract void. Jurisdiction denied." A few nervous chuckles leaked from the back benches where 2 of his followers sat in ill-fitting blazers, clutching legal pads full of internet phrases. Judge Ward did not look at them. "This is not a contract," she said. "It is if I say it is," Damien replied. That was the first audible gasp. Not loud, just enough to ripple across the room like wind moving over dry leaves. Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but there was something steady in them too, something that had survived every unpaid bill, every double shift, every lonely night after her husband died. Damien had counted on her being too tired, too scared, too poor to fight. That was the surface story, a nuisance hearing, a strange man with strange paperwork. But that's when everything changed, because the county prosecutor stood and said this case was no longer just about a lien. He laid down 3 folders, then 2 more, then a thick binder tied with yellow tape. The sound alone shifted the air. "Your Honor," he said, "the state moves to admit evidence of a continuing scheme to defraud vulnerable property owners through fraudulent commercial affidavits, retaliatory liens, intimidation mailings, and willful interference with court process." Damien's smile flickered for the first time. The prosecutor turned to Evelyn. He asked her to tell the court what had happened, and she did it without tears, which somehow made it hit harder. She explained how Damien had approached her after a community seminar at a church basement, where he promised seniors he could unlock their homes from taxes and medical debt using sovereign filings. She said he had spoken fast, used words she didn't understand, and kept calling her dear in a tone that made her feel small. When she declined to buy his package, he mailed her a document claiming she had entered into a contract by remaining in dishonor. Then came invoices, then penalties, then a lien for $72,000 against the house she and her husband had finished paying off 2 years before he died of cancer. As she spoke, the courtroom lighting seemed harsher, the scrape of a pen louder, every inhale more noticeable. Damien rolled his eyes and muttered, "She's confused." Judge Ward's head lifted. "You will not interrupt her again." Damien shrugged. Then he smiled at Evelyn, not kindly, but with that oily superiority men like him wear when they think the system was built to forgive them. People like her always cry fraud when they realize they're not smart enough to understand commerce. The courtroom went silent. Even the ceiling hum seemed to vanish. A clerk stopped typing mid-keystroke. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Wow." Evelyn did not cry. She straightened her back. Judge Ward folded her hands. "People like her," she repeated softly. Damien, sensing attention and mistaking it for power, doubled down. "Yes, Your Honor. Emotional debtors, low information citizens. They panic when an educated man asserts his rights." That was the moment the room turned on him. You could feel it. The temperature didn't change, but everything else did. He was no longer a nuisance. He was a predator who had just announced in public exactly how he saw his victims. The prosecutor asked permission to publish video evidence. On the monitor, grainy but clear enough, the courthouse mailroom CCTV appeared. Damien stood at the counter in the same expensive coat he wore now, signing for certified mail with a heavy flourish before stepping outside and stamping "Offer Not Accepted" across the envelope in red, filming himself on his phone like he was performing a magic trick. Then the video cut to a second clip from his own live stream, recovered by subpoena. He looked into the camera and laughed. "Watch this. They think service creates obligation, but if you reject the offer in red, they can't contract with your personhood. This is how you bury them in their own system." A murmur exploded through the room. Damien sat up. Out of context. Then came the letters. 8 of them. One from a disabled veteran whose truck had been seized after Damien sold him the same fake debt erasure packet. One from a single mother who lost an apartment application when Damien filed a fabricated commercial claim under her name. One from a pastor whose church basement seminar had been used to recruit half the victims in the binder. Then county records, one by one, showing 14 retaliatory liens across 3 jurisdictions. Then bank transfers. Then screenshots of Damien instructing followers to target widows, elderly homeowners, and scared borrowers, because, as one message read, they settle fast. His face began to change. The smug looseness around his mouth tightened. He tugged his cuff once, then again. The red tie that had looked bold when he entered now seemed too bright, almost ridiculous, like a wound he had chosen to wear. Still he tried. "This is selective enforcement. I do not consent. I am here under threat, duress, and coercion." Judge Ward glanced down at the exhibit, then back at him. "Mr. Cross, the law does not become imaginary because you mispronounce it." A suppressed laugh broke from somewhere near the jury rail, quickly swallowed, but the damage was done. Damien flushed. He rose halfway out of his chair. "I do not recognize this court, and I certainly do not recognize the authority of a woman employed by a bankrupt municipal corporation." Gasps. Then a dead, silent courtroom. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, dangerous, final. Judge Ward did not blink. "Sit down." Something in her voice made even the spectators feel ordered. Damien sat. When she began to speak again, it was not louder. It was colder. "You have confused performance with power. You believed that if you wore a suit, bought a stamp, spoke in circles, and targeted people too decent to think like you, the law would become too exhausted to touch you. You believed paperwork was a weapon, and the vulnerable were safe prey. You were wrong." She turned slightly, not toward the gallery, not toward the cameras, but toward the truth of the room itself. A court exists for exactly this reason: to separate confidence from credibility, to separate language from law. to separate a citizen exercising rights from a coward exploiting fear. Damien opened his mouth. She silenced him with one raised finger. No, Mr. Cross. You have spoken enough. You mailed threats to widows. You clouded titles on family homes. You sold legal fantasies to people in pain. You retaliated when they resisted. You tried to convert confusion into profit and cruelty into doctrine. And when called to account, you wrote, "Offer not accepted," in red ink across a lawful summons, as if a child's game could erase an adult consequence. Let me be perfectly clear, because I suspect clarity has always been your natural enemy. Red ink does not turn nonsense into law. The line landed like a hammer. No one moved, no one coughed. The courtroom went silent again, but this time it was reverent, almost stunned, because everyone knew they had just heard the sentence that would be repeated outside that building before lunch. Judge Ward continued, and now there was something devastating in the precision of her calm. The law is not a costume for grifters. It is not a maze built for your amusement. It is a shield for the weak, a boundary for the shameless, and today, Mr. Cross, it is the end of your theater. Damien's shoulders, which had entered so broad and careless, seemed to fold inward by the inch. He tried to speak once more, but whatever he had relied on all these years, volume, certainty, contempt, had deserted him. All that came out was a dry, cracked, "I object." Judge Ward looked at him with almost pity, overruled by reality. Then she delivered the ruling. She voided every fraudulent lien identified in the record and ordered immediate release and correction of all county title impairments. She entered judgment for restitution, punitive damages, court costs, and attorney's fees. She found probable cause for criminal fraud, extortion, tampering with public records, and contempt, and remanded him into custody pending referral to the district attorney and financial crimes unit. She barred him from filing any commercial paper or property claim without prior judicial review. Then, after a pause that let every word settle where it belonged, she ordered the bailiff to take him in chains. That was when Damien finally broke. Not theatrically, not nobly. He looked around for the followers who had laughed with him earlier, but they couldn't meet his eyes. He twisted toward the aisle and barked, "This isn't over." His voice cracked on the last word. The bailiff took his wrist, firm and professional. The expensive watch disappeared beneath steel. For the first time all morning, Damien Cross looked exactly what he was, not a sovereign, not a scholar, not a rebel, but a frightened fraud in a bright tie and borrowed language. Evelyn Harper did not celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and let out a breath that seemed to have been trapped in her body for months. When she opened them again, there was moisture there, yes, but also relief, and something stronger than relief, restoration. People in the gallery turned toward her with small, stunned expressions, as if they had just witnessed a house being handed back to its rightful owner one brick at a time. In the weeks that followed, more victims came forward. County clerks in 2 neighboring districts reopened suspicious filings. One of Damien's seminar partners took a plea and handed over account records. A consumer protection task force was formed. Churches posted warnings. Legal aid volunteers used Judge Ward's ruling to clear titles for families who had almost given up. Evelyn kept her home. She repainted the hallway herself in the spring, a warm cream color her husband used to love, and on the little table where the foreclosure letters had once sat, she placed a framed photo of the two of them smiling in front of that same house 25 years earlier. People still quote Judge Ward's line, but the real power of that day was bigger than one sentence. It was the reminder that cruelty often arrives dressed as confidence, that predators love complicated words because they think ordinary people will mistake confusion for authority, and that sometimes justice does not roar. Sometimes it sits very still, waits for the lie to finish, and then destroys it with one clean truth. If that moment hit you, if you've ever watched someone weaponize arrogance against decent people and prayed to see the mask ripped off in public, leave your verdict in the comments, like this story, subscribe for more courtroom justice, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that no matter how loud a fraud speaks, the truth only has to speak once.